Check, 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 check. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be listening to this episode of Dwight's Bites. I am recording this on Sunday, March 6th, 2022. This is going to be a nice and cheerful episode of Dwight's Bites. I'm kidding. Come on, you know what the deal is. So look, we have a lot of ground to cover. Some things obvious, some things inobvious. But I would like for you to join me on this journey. This isn't going to be kind of like a bicycle ride in the park sort of journey. This is going to be more like the Willy Wonka, tunnel boat ride sort of journey. So forgive me, but stay with me on this because I think there's a few points that we need to make and understand. The general point of these episodes too, and this is kind of these episodes to me is kind of a great flush, a flush of relief, because there's kind of a lot of things that I think we all see and accumulate in our minds as we're, mindlessly doom scrolling at like 4 a.m. And I think a lot of these things, and at least for me, and I'm sure is the case for a lot of you listening, is that it kind of accumulates and how it manifests in often is like this kind of, this welling dread that you feel. It's like you feel it behind your eyeballs pushing, and it might be high blood pressure, but it's something that requires a lot of that requires a little digging into, so that we can kind of like have this catharsis and understand that where we're going and reduce that feeling in our stomach of that might be GERD, but reduce that feeling of tension, so that we can find some clarity and understand how we need to change things going forward. And because if we don't do that, and what we're going to talk about today, we are seeing the tides move. So I would like to start off with a section that I just wrote in my notes. I just called it Red Democrats. I couldn't think of any other way to say it. A lot of the kind of like rhetoric that the Republicans have been using over the last, like, call it 8 years, whatever, 10 years, something like that, is the idea of like blue states, liberal cities, that sort of thing. I remember one of my favorite exchanges from the 2016 Republican primary, I think, was Ted Cruz and Maria Bartiromo, where he was asked about like New York values or something.
I think most people know exactly what New York values are.
I am from New York.
Well, you're from New York, so you might not. But I promise you, in the state of South Carolina, they do. And listen, there are many, many wonderful, wonderful working men and women in the state of New York. But everyone understands that the values in New York City are socially liberal or pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage, focused around money and the media.
And it was so funny because Maria Bartiromo was like, "The fuck, dude, I'm from New York. Like, why are you saying that to my face?" And Ted Cruz was like, "Well, you didn't. Yeah, if you knew it, then you don't know it," or whatever the hell he says. Anyway, so the point is that that's been used as like a conservative rhetorical parlance for some time, and the idea is like it kind of tugs at the conservative feeling of like, oh well, the real America is like in the heartland or in the South or in the red areas of the country. And, this is just some, liberal utopia that they're trying to do, but it's actually terrible. And, it's homelessness is pervasive and all those things. And what the reality is on the ground, especially now, is very different. And I think that what I'm seeing, this is kind of one of the things I just want to digest out loud with everybody, is that despite the fact that Joe Biden is not a leader, right? He's a manager. It's a very big difference between managing and leading, right? And despite the fact that he's quite weak, and he hasn't been talking much off the cuff in front of us, he's only really had a handful of press conferences. Despite that fact, he has been able to, and I think just as a kind of leader, de facto leader of the party, move the party rightward, or maybe not even. I wouldn't say move the party rightward. I would say just stifle any popular call for, economic, certainly, but even social progress. And I'm going to cite a few sources here for why I'm saying this. And I'm going to start off with, well, of course, I mean, look, the most stark thing that we've seen in the last in the last week is the State of the Union.
We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities.
I mean, just stunning. Hey, he got some bipartisanship, didn't he? He got everybody to stand up in the whole damn hall there. You got Mark Meadows and Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell standing and applauding and all that stuff, and of course, the cop and the capitalist behind him, Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi. Anyway, just stunning stuff. He watched in his lifetime civil rights, and then like the largest protest movement in the history of the country, which was 2 years ago in the summer of 2020. And their answer is just like, it's like fucking Michael Corleone to the senator in Utah. It's like or Nevada. My answer is nothing. My offer is nothing, Senator. Stunning stuff. So continuing on this, I would like to talk about something that is happening in the liberal utopia of New York, the state in which I reside. And we're going to be talking about the Governor Hochul, and I'll just read the following. Okay, so let's understand what the good guys are doing while they hold the seat of power. I'm reading from the New York Focus, and this is an article that came out February 23rd. And the title is, Hochul proposes bringing back private prison labor. Banned for a century, contract labor could return to New York's prisons. And I'm just going to read through this a little bit. Vidal Guzman worked as a mason, a porter, and a food server during his 4 years of incarceration. At Riverview Correctional Facility, a New York State prison near the Canadian border, he earned 16 cents per hour working in the cafeteria. His paycheck was around $3.50 per week. When he went to the prison's commissary for the first time, he remembered scrounging together money to buy 1 stamp and 2 packs of ramen noodles. Side note, and I just don't know this, so forgive my ignorance, but do they have to buy stamps? Like to send letters out and communicate? It's so insane. He says here, it's a very embarrassing moment when you're looking at the commissary and you're dividing pennies to see how much you have, Guzman told the New York Focus. As part of her executive budget, Governor Kathy Hochul included a proposal that takes aim at low prison wages, not by paying them more in their current jobs when they're employed by the state, but by passing a constitutional amendment to overturn New York's century-old ban on private employment of incarcerated people. Hochul argues that private employers would pay higher wages. Oh my God. Yeah, you know what capitalists try to do? Pay you more than anybody else. Fucking delusional. The same wages that would be offered for comparable work outside prison, and offer more job training. This is so sick. The measure is part of a broad agenda she has proposed, dubbed, quote, jails to jobs. Jesus. To reform the state's reentry system and help people secure jobs and housing after they're released from prison or jail. Many advocates for incarcerated people, including Guzman, who since his release in 2014 has worked on a campaign to raise the minimum prison wage to $3 an hour, are skeptical. They acknowledge that private employers could pay higher wages, but they say lax oversight of parallel programs in other states has enabled illegal exploitation. I should add that not that legal exploitation is that much better. They also object to Hochul's proposal to allow the state to garnish up to 50% of incarcerated people's wages under the program. What a joke. This is just a way to gain money for private industries at the exploitation of folks who have already been exploited over and over again within society, said Ann Oradeco, a supervising attorney of the Legal Aid Society Racial Justice Unit. I'll leave it here. I'll just leave it here. But this is just a little amuse-bouche, a little taste for you to understand what's going on under, supposed, liberal utopias of Democrat run. I mean, right? This is a state where there's a Democrat governor. It's one of the quote bluer states in the country, although obviously it's an extremely large state with a huge variety of political proclivities. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, like two of the counties in the United States that voted the highest proportion for Trump in 2020 were in New York. I think it's Richmond County, which is Staten Island, and then Suffolk County, of course, which is Eastern Long Island. So it's just a wild state, to say the least. But again, speaking about, the need for prison abolition and in New York City, where now there is, of course, a Democrat in office as mayor, but is a vegan fascist named Eric Adams. I'm going to read here from a New York Times article that came out a few days ago, on March 2nd, called How Brutal Beatings on Rikers Island Were Hidden from Public View. One man was paralyzed from the neck down. Another landed in a coma. Neither injury was documented properly in New York City jail system, awash in disorder. I'm going to read here. When a man was beaten on Rikers Island in December, guards at the New York City jail complex downplayed his injuries, delaying filing a report, and then including only minimal information: fractured eye socket, swelling of the head, no hospitalization required. The reality looked much different. Hours after another detainee slammed the man, Jose Matias, 25 years old, to the floor and kicked him in the head, Mr. Matias began having seizures. Jesus. He was taken to a hospital where doctors removed a chunk of his skull to ease swelling in his brain. He spent 6 weeks in a coma and, when he emerged, had to relearn how to walk and talk. It was at least the second time in 4 months that the Department of Correction had failed to document a serious injury to a person in custody, records and interviews show. In the other case, in August, a man being held in an intake cell was beaten so badly by another detainee that he was paralyzed from the neck down. No reports were ever filed, and as far as the jail system's record were concerned, the assault never happened. For all the alarms that had been sounded over rising violence and disorder on Rikers Island, the two cases raise an astonishing prospect that the levels of brutality experienced by detainees over the past year may have been even worse than was previously known. The episodes also raise questions about the thoroughness of an incident reporting process that is supposed to give the public an accurate picture of violence inside the jails and equip policymakers with data on which to base decisions. Just to pause for a second, I mean, I don't even know how to articulate this. The violence is, of course, going to occur when people have their dignity stripped of them and they're brutalized. Not to mention that it is the reason that they're there in the first place is entirely at the hands of no other way to describe this, a white supremacist justice system that includes, cops making whatever accusations they want, crimes of poverty. The variety of reasons that people end up at Rikers is so high from just not having the money to clear the things that they need to do legally to actual crimes of violence and stuff like that. But again, it doesn't matter by the time you get there because you just enter the Thunderdome. It's sick. Reading on here, it is a system that has broken down in the past. Investigators with the Department of Correction found in 2012 that a warden and his deputy had omitted hundreds of detainee fights from departmental statistics to make their jail seem safer than it was. A review by the Board of Correction and Oversight Panel in 2019 found that the department was frequently underreporting serious injuries sustained by people in custody, and when reports were filed, important information was often missing. And the New York Times reported in January that jailers had failed to document the harm that befell detainees who were forced by a gang leader to participate in a, quote, fight night while other incarcerated people cheered them on. But the injuries suffered by the two detainees in August and December, which have not been previously reported, occurred at a time when Rikers Island was already under intense scrutiny for its high rates of violence, as members of Congress were calling for the Biden administration to step in. And what happened? Nothing. A Department of Correction spokeswoman said both incidents were under investigation. But Louis Molina, the jails commissioner, declined to be interviewed. He said in a statement that he had identified deficiencies within the department and intended to correct the dysfunction, quote, that he inherited from the previous administration, but he did not elaborate. Appointed in January by Mayor Eric Adams, Mr. Molina is facing the worst crisis to befall the city jail system since the crack epidemic crested in the early 1990s. Thank you, New York Times. After the coronavirus pandemics first swept through, thousands of correction officers stopped going to work. Yeah, by the way, that's like a whole thing that I think we've mentioned on another episode where they just like stopped reporting to work. They were just taking sick weeks and stuff like this. So of course these people are left to just, you know, what else do they have? This is set up to brutalize people. There's no other way to interpret this. And again, this is while, you know, the good guys supposedly are in charge. I want to shift to discussing Democrats again, and this is just a little kind of aside. I'm going to set it up with this and put something in contrast. There was another New York Times article that I saw February 28th called "Climate Change is Harming the Planet Faster Than We Can Adapt," the UN warns. Countries aren't doing nearly enough to protect against the disasters to come as the planet keeps heating up, a major new scientific study reports. And it just says here, the report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a body of experts convened by the United Nations, is the most detailed look yet at the threats posed by global warming. It concludes that nations aren't doing nearly enough to protect cities, farms, and coastlines from the hazards that climate change has unleashed so far, such as record droughts and rising seas, let alone from the even greater disasters in store as the planet continues to warm. Now, I think this is a surprise to no one. We kind of know this intuitively, right? I mean, we understand that what we are doing, and the United States is included in this, is woefully, under resourced. They're not doing shit about it, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm going to contrast this with how the Democrats are handling this, which was really interesting that our good friend Chris brought to our attention today, which was a tweet here. This is just from yesterday from Ken Vogel. It says, "Scoop, senior Biden administration officials are traveling to Venezuela today to meet with Maduro's regime." I like good old Ken Vogel here from the New York Times, put Maduro in all caps. "It is part of an effort," right? Why is the Biden administration, this was Chris's point too, and he said, it's like Maduro's regime. Why are they putting it in capital letters there? Because like the Democrats and even like the Republicans, they had fucking they had fucking Juan Guaido like at the State of the Union, and like everyone's like, this is the real president of Venezuela. Now, of course, they're recognizing Maduro as the president. Why? Because of the following. It's part of an effort to drive a wedge between Venezuela and Russia, and is the highest level visit by U.S. officials to Caracas in years. Now, why would they be going at this time? What is the thing that ties Russia and Venezuela, and of course that the U.S. is interested in? Guess what? Fossil fuels, oil. It says here from this New York Times article, senior U.S. officials are traveling to Venezuela on Saturday to meet with the government of President Nicolas Maduro, according to people familiar with the matter, as the Biden administration sets up efforts to separate Russia from its remaining international allies amid a widening standoff over Ukraine. And here it goes, right? The trip is the highest level visit by Washington officials to Caracas, Venezuela's capital, in years. The United States broke off diplomatic relations with Mr. Maduro and closed its embassy in Caracas in 2019 after accusing the authoritarian leader of electoral fraud. Isn't that fucking ironic? The Trump administration then tried to topple Mr. Maduro's government by sanctioning Venezuelan oil exports and the country's senior officials, and by recognizing the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, as Venezuela's lawful president. So here it is, right? Mr. Maduro responded to the sanctions by seeking economic and diplomatic help from Russia, as well as Iran and China. Russian energy companies and banks have been instrumental in allowing Venezuela to continue exporting oil, the country's biggest source of foreign currency, despite the sanctions, according to U.S. officials. So the reason I bring this up is, the talking out of two sides of the mouth, right? It's the Democrats, led by Joseph Biden, who are saying out of one side of their mouth, like, we need to do something about climate change. I got my property right on the river in Delaware. It'd be a heck of a thing if I had to get out. I just put all sorts of fertilizer on the lawn. I have a nice green lawn for all the kids to be running around. We could toss the pigskin. That's what my dad and I did as a kid in Scranton. He used to pay me a nickel for every mole hole I would walk over. All right, I'm done. Okay. Anyway, so out of one side of his mouth, they're saying we need to do climate. We need to address climate change. We're going to be the world leader in climate change. And then on the other hand, the a war with the belligerent being one of the larger oil producers on Earth, right? Russia, that proposes a problem. When you're sanctioning them, you can't just go and buy oil from Russia and oil and gas from Russia, right? Especially from Europe, right? So where are we going to get it from? Well, hey, guys, knocking on the door. Hey, Venezuela. I know that, we said we don't even recognize your sovereignty as an elected official. I know that we had your literal, political rival, although not really, and recognized him as the true head of state. And yes, what was his fucking name? Richard Branson went to the border of Venezuela and Colombia with just the spectacle of, supplies and aid, saying your people are suffering. But here, look at here. If you only stopped being such a communist, you could have something. I mean, just unbelievable brutality, with the sanctions, just because, they wanted to have a shred of social democracy or whatever. And there's a long history in that we don't need to get into. There's much nuance. But anyway, the broad strokes here. It's so fucking transparent. And, I just saw that this evening that oil had reached $135 per barrel. I don't even think it got that high during the insane, run on commodities going up to 2008. I could be wrong, but I think it was just unbelievable. When oil gets over $100 a barrel, it's insane. In fact, let me look up something here. So a metric that I thought that you'd be interested in is the Baker Hughes rig count. Baker Hughes is a, enormous oil and gas, oil field services company, and they have a rig count, right? So they measure how many rigs are running in the United States. And I thought that you should find this interesting. Of course, this is all under a Democrat administration, but I'm looking at the rig count from March 2021 and the rig count from March 2022. And it has gone up 38%. There are 38% more rigs running that are, actively drilling in the United States than were 1 year prior. So under the Biden administration, according to Baker Hughes, there is a nearly 40% increase in the amount of rigs that are drilling for oil and gas in the United States as a result, I think, as a result of increasing prices. I think this is something that we should come back to and take a look into as things go further. And that should give you fucking terror, because at the same time that we see this, we see the United Nations telling us that, fossil fuels primarily are causing climate change. It's just increasing at a marked rate. And the fact that it's $135 a barrel, well, guess who's fucking celebrating this? Let's look at ExxonMobil stock. ExxonMobil, oh my God. On February 24th, the price was $76 a share. It's now $84 a share. In the past 5 days, it has appreciated 10%. Do you see what's happening here? What if the Democrats are in charge and they're supposed to be the good guys that are saying, hey, we're going to handle this, and you better not vote for Republicans, because if you get that, then you're just going to get climate hell and we're all going to die. What's changing? Show me what's changing. Somebody explain to me what's getting better here. Because what I'm seeing is conflict is occurring worldwide. And as a result, the Biden administration's primary concerns are, where can we get more oil to burn? So we got to go make nice with Venezuela. And in the meantime, domestic producers in the United States are going fucking gangbusters. So can somebody please explain to me where the progress is happening that was promised under a Democrat administration? Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. So I don't feel good about that, to say the least. I would like to switch into the liberal utopia of Democrat-run municipalities and governments to COVID, right? And this is a bit of a follow-up on the last Dwight Bites. One of my favorite headlines to come. The The consent factory must have been on running a third shift, because this was one of my favorite headlines so far this year. And I know it's only March, but this came out March 1st, NBC News. And it says here, Democrats turn against mask mandates as COVID landscape and voter attitudes shift. The sublead here is, the decision is being driven by a mix of science and political science. I fucking love it. You gotta believe science. We're the party that believes in science. You're not just saying things just to get more votes. Just tell people what I want to hear. We gotta do the right thing. We gotta wear the mask. You gotta flatten the curve. Remember that. So again, what does this say? The stark hypocrisy here is that it's the Democrats don't believe in science. The reason that the Democrat-run, states like New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, who are the first kind of on the East Coast to end the mask mandates, the reason that they straight up said that they were doing so was because to appeal to conservatives and, or the conservative parts of their state, as if they would vote for them. Like, what are they even fucking doing it for? What's the what Republican voter is looking at a Democrat who gives them what they want and doesn't still call them a Marxist or a communist or, an Antifa supporter or whatever? It's bullshit. And so I'm just going to read from this NBC News article very quickly. It says, when President Joe Biden gives his State of the Union speech Tuesday, the mask mandate will be gone in the Capitol, reflecting a stark nationwide shift for Democrats against the public safety rule that has fueled a red versus blue culture war. Behind the shift is a blend of science and political science. Do you see how quickly it just turned into, oh, well, actually, it's a good calculation that they're ignoring the fact that, more people have died in the last week of COVID than, 4 9/11s. You know what I'm saying? It's still it's over like 1,000 deaths a day. 1,000 people are dying per day. And that's been low. Like that's now where things have decreased. Fucking delusional. I won't doubt that, that things are going better. This is a better direction. And honestly, in my heart, I hope to fuck that this will be like the last scary variant of concern. Guys, I fucking hope so. I don't know if I can do it anymore. The stress has been so intense, and I can't even tell, like, the hypervigilance that I continue to do. Dude, I know this might be like, this is crazy, and this is maybe more than I should admit, but like, even when I'm like walking on the street, and I live in New York City, so I'm around a lot of people, like sometimes, and I'm wearing a mask, obviously, even outside, I just like feel the hypervigilance, and I like, sometimes I walk past somebody that's not wearing a mask, and like I close my eyes, because in my head I'm like, well, they could be, shedding viral load, and it can get into my eyes, even if it doesn't go, and that's a little bit, and well, I haven't had my booster now for, over 6 months, and so the efficacy, like, even these things are so wearing on you, and I've aged. I feel it, man. Oh, God. Anyway, despite all that things, one of the things we know about, like, viruses and pandemics and stuff like that is that as time goes on, new strains and new variants tend to be weaker as things go on. So that's, at some point this will change, right? But we're gonna address that in a second. But anyway, I don't want to belabor this too much because we're already running long. But it's just astounding to me that the Democrats, the supposed good guys, have just ceded all of that space and just said, you know what, Republicans, we're actually just going to adopt that strategy because I don't know, ? Here's the problem, though. And I'm going to read now from a Nature article from the 10th of February. And it reads as follows. Heart disease risk soars after COVID, even with a mild case. Massive study shows a long-term substantial rise in the risk of cardiovascular disease, including heart attack and stroke following a COVID infection. Just going to read a little bit into this. So that's fucking disturbing, right? So let's read about this. Even a mild case of COVID-19 can increase a person's risk of cardiovascular problems for at least a year after the diagnosis, a new study shows. Researchers found that the rates of many conditions, such as heart failure and stroke, were substantially higher in people who had recovered from COVID-19 than in similar people who had not had the disease. What's more, the risk was elevated even for those who were under 65 years of age and lacked risk factors such as obesity and diabetes. Quote here, "It doesn't matter if you're young or old. It doesn't matter if you smoked or you didn't," said the study co-author Ziad Al-Ali at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and the chief research and development for the Veterans Affairs of the St. Louis healthcare system. The risk was there. Al-Ali and his colleagues based their research on an extensive health record database curated by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. The researchers compared more than 150,000 veterans who'd survived for at least 3 days after contracting COVID-19 with two groups of uninfected people, a group of more than 5 million people who used the VA medical system during the pandemic. People who had recovered from COVID-19 showed stark increases in 20 cardiovascular problems over a year after their infection. For example, they were 52% more likely to have had a stroke than the contemporary control group, meaning that out of every 1,000 people studied, there were 4 more people in the COVID-19 group than in the control group who experienced a stroke. And get this, the risk of heart failure increased by 72%. I apologize if you've had COVID-19. I don't mean to scare you here. But from a public health standpoint, this isn't about whether or not you had a mild case or you survived it. This isn't just, who has lived and who has died as a result of this. This is a long-term public health catastrophe in wait. There's now been directly attributed to COVID-19, 957,000 deaths. And for every day that goes by, it shouldn't be another, 2 months or so before that crests 1 million. But if you think about this on a public health way, there are 2 major entities. This is obviously very nuanced and all this stuff, but there's 2 major entities that cover health, healthcare in the United States. There's private insurers. Fuck you if you are one. Sorry. And there's the state. There's Medicare. There's Medicaid. There's that sorts of things. And then, of course, there's just straight up uninsured or people that are just too scared to go to too scared of the financial ramifications to even seek healthcare, right? But even for those that are on Medicare, this is going to become more expensive for us down the road, right? That's the whole fucking thing about Medicare is extremely expensive comparatively as a nation because there is a incentive for private insurers not to keep you healthy enough, but just keep you healthy just enough till you age out of their program and go on to Medicare. So this is going to be, even if you just look at this so cynically, this is going to be a disaster for us, financially as a country, just to handle people that are dying, and not to mention the quality of life that people are going to suffer as a result of this. On average, this is a much, much sicker country as a result of the complete mismanagement of this pandemic. What a fucking joke. And so to see that, a mix of science and political science, go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. It's bullshit. We are completely abandoned in this whole process. Given where we are in the program, I'm going to move on, although there was one thing I really wanted to cover. There's a tweet by Rachel Kors where it says, the White House's COVID-19 budget crunch, whatever that means, we should not have to fucking think about a budget for this, but is so serious that the budget has delayed buying more than 9 million courses of Pfizer's antiviral pill. This is about half of the total the White House publicly has promised to buy. And then Laura Marsh quote tweeted this, explaining the whole Biden plan, dropping all NPIs, redefining high-risk areas as low risk, was predicated on getting 10 million doses of Paxlovid, which is the antiviral pill, except they're only contracted for 800,000. Again, it's a total fucking joke how they're just completely abandoning this, but I'm already feeling warm here, so I'm just going to ignore this. What I do want to follow up with, though, however, is just a piece by Ed Yong in The Atlantic, and I'm just going to read the title of this here. It says, "The pandemic is following a very predictable and depressing pattern. As with diseases such as malaria and HIV, rich countries are, quote, moving on from COVID while poor ones continue to get ravaged." And it says here, Americans, by and large, are putting the pandemic behind them. Now that Omicron is in the rearview mirror and cases are plummeting, even many of those who have stayed cautious for 2 full years are spouting narratives about going back to normal or living with COVID-19. This mentality is also translated into policy. The last pandemic restrictions are fading nationwide, which we talked about. And in his State of the Union address on Tuesday night, President Joe Biden declared that, quote, most Americans can remove their masks, return to work, stay in the classroom, and move forward safely. Go fuck yourself. Other rich, highly vaccinated countries are following much the same path. In the United Kingdom, for example, those with COVID-19 no longer have to self-isolate. It helps with these countries have more vaccine doses than they know what to do with, and a stockpile of tools to test and treat their residents if and when they get sick, which, by the way, isn't fucking saying much because it's distributed completely unequally. But in the global south, COVID-19 is much harder to ignore. More than a year after the start of the mass vaccination campaign, nearly 3 billion people are still waiting for their first shot. While an average of 80% of the people in high-income countries have gotten at least one dose, that figure stands at just 13% in low-income countries. In the poorest countries, which, by the way, I always, anytime I see that phrase, I always have to rebuff against it because I don't think there's anything such thing as a poor country, right? Because, let's take examples of, many countries in Africa. Let's take the Congo, for example. If, why would a country be poor when there's so many colonial powers trying to get in there? It's rich. It's just that their resources are distributed outside of their country. Anyway, just have to say that. Such low vaccination rates are taking their toll. Although the official death count is about 500,000, for example, the reality might be closer to 5 million excess deaths. And most of those deaths happen after vaccines were introduced in the global north. The rush in the rich countries to declare the pandemic over while it continues to ravage the global south is completely predictable. In fact, the same trend has played out again and again. Infectious diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS that are now seen as, quote, third world diseases were once serious threats in rich countries, but when the incidence of these diseases began to decline there, the global north moved on and reduced investments in tools and programs. Now with COVID-19, the developing world has once again been left to fend for itself against an extremely transmissible virus without the necessary vaccine doses, tests, and treatment tools. Some pandemics never truly end. They just become invisible to the people in the global north. Sick shit. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. It's sick shit. And I completely agree with him. And especially, what is going to happen when those same, long-term issues that people are having as a result of their mild COVID infections hit them, right? And I'm just reading from another Reuters article here just to bolster that point. It was from earlier this week. It says, almost a third of people report lingering symptom 6 to 12 months after COVID-19 survey. So, it's just, this is not an isolated incident that ends after 2 weeks or whatever, right? This is a long-term, longitudinal medical catastrophe that requires constant maintenance and detention. We've crossed the Rubicon. It's happened. Now we have to manage it. We have to fix this. We have to give people the resources to weather this for maybe the rest of their lives. It's sick shit, man. So I want to move on here to something that I just felt like we couldn't ignore talking about, which is the complete fucking human rights disaster that's unfolding in Greg Abbott's Texas. One I should mention among many human rights disasters happening in Texas, but this specifically affects trans people living in Texas. And just reading here from I can't even. It's really bad. I'm just going to read a synopsis here from a Aaron in the Morn tweet here, where it says, Greg Abbott has officially directed Family and Protective Services to begin investigating all trans children in Texas and prosecuting their parents as child abusers. He has also instructed teachers, doctors, and caregivers to begin reporting any trans students they see. What a fucking disaster. A human rights disaster. And, there are so many devastating ramifications as a result of this that it's hard to even enumerate. But one thing that I kind of thought about was, in this is an example, right? And the theme of this program, this particular episode, is, what can the good guys do about it, right? I mean, the people who purportedly are the good guys that are in power, that if you didn't vote for them, the bad guys would all be so much worse. I'm still struggling to see what the policy differences are between the two. But I had a thought about Executive Order 11111. And this was, the famous incident that happened in June in 1963 in Alabama, where, the governor, George Wallace, basically, took charge and wanted to say that black students can't integrate with, white students in Alabama. This was his inaugural, his big inaugural promise. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And this was a time when, rights for, black people in the United States were trying to be asserted. And there was a little bit of shred of social democracy at the time coming off of the tail of the New Deal. And this was under the Kennedy administration, some push forward for progress in civil rights at the time. And what did President Kennedy do about this? He sent the fucking National Guard down to Alabama to enforce the result of the Brown versus Board of Education, Supreme Court decision. The idea was that integration was legal and was the law of the land. And what did he do about it? He sent down the fucking National Guard to he sent down troops to confront the governor in his own state. As a result, the individuals were allowed to enroll in the school. Now, there's obviously a very, specific history of, I'm not equating these two things directly, but the thing I am trying to equate is what can be done? What are the tools? What is the fucking historical precedent? What are the arrows in the quiver that can be done that the Biden administration can do about this? When you have a governor that is creating a fucking hunt for children and their families. Children. He should send down the fucking troops and put the boots to them. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. Are you committed to social issues or not? Do trans people have rights in this country or not? Because if they're not allowed to exist, then they don't have rights. So fucking do something about it. And I'm not going to say anything further. Democrats have ceded populist economic issues to the right wing, right? We're not going to get, we're just not going to get populist economic issues subsumed by even fucking liberals, let alone like left-leaning ideas. That has been ceded to the right wing. Democrats want to have the monopoly on moral high ground on social issues, right? This is the only reason that they fucking get elected or whatever. And they're not even doing that. I don't know what they're doing about this. Probably nothing is my guess. And in the meantime, there is going to be a generation of traumatized children based on who they are. It's very bad. That's not good. Again, this is something that Shane introduced me to, which is a great, the interpretation of the Internationale by Billy Bragg, and where he says, freedom is merely privilege extended unless enjoyed by one and all. What a disaster. So I would like to close this out by addressing something about Ukraine. We're seeing some, it's war. It's an invasion. It's a brutalization. It's not even a war. There was no antagonizing. Like, it's just this kind of like Russian. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not a scholar of this. I just yell at Michael McFaul on Twitter. But there's one part of it that I really wanted to bring some attention to, which is to discuss something about humanizing and being able to relate to something that's happening in war. And specifically in Ukraine. I cannot get into this without quickly just mentioning where a invading scholar, I guess I can call her, the former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, went on Fox News Sunday and said, when you invade a sovereign nation, that's a war crime. She was she was the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence when they invaded Iraq. Come on. Like, come on. It's they're just laughing in our faces. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, so to understand this, I mean, I want to explain kind of how this goes, and a lot of what we talked about in the last Dwight's Bites was about, family and the destruction of the social contract and the destruction of the institution of family. And in war, there's this, you're just destroying people's lives and their families and everything. There's children involved and future children involved, and I wanted to focus on that because I came across this, and I it's been haunting me ever since, and I just want to discuss it for a second. So I'm reading, interestingly enough, from a TMZ article that was from earlier this week. It was updated yesterday, in fact, and it says here, in Ukraine, IVF clinics under threat. Kiev doc trying to save embryos. IVF, for those that don't know, is in vitro fertilization. Fertilization rates in the United States and in Europe broadly are decreasing quite drastically, and I think that there's a lot of political economic reasons for that. But I'm going to read here. It says, "Oh wow, there's an update to this, but I'm gonna tell you about it in a second." As Ukrainians try fleeing while Putin wreaks havoc, one group that has been all but forgotten is unborn kids in the form of embryos, which some docs are fighting hard to save. Word of a brave practitioner named Biral Aydin, who runs an IVF clinic called IVMed in Kiev, has spread to the community online, and the story goes, this man has attempted to remove a number of cryogenic tanks containing precious would-be life out of the country. As one Yale professor puts it on Facebook, Aydin supposedly tried smuggling upwards of 10 cryo tanks on day one of the Russian invasion. And after 5 days of travel, he finally reached the border and was able to apparently get the last of the 5 tanks out of Ukraine in the first trip. The professor said he's hearing that Aydin had to go back for the rest of his shortly thereafter, also noting he's a Turkish citizen and is under no obligation to do this. As for the rest of the clinics in town, it's said to be dangerous right now, with the majority of tanks being stored in bunkers with low supply of liquid nitrogen needed to keep them cold, and not a great outlook of viability the longer the conflict lasts. Even more troubling is the fact that any male IVF docs or staffers are reported to have taken up arms in the military there to fight, leaving the facilities unmanned and mostly abandoned as Russia continues to move on in the capital. There's been an update to this article where it says the director, Aydin, tells TMZ that he was able to successfully transport all 17 tanks out of Ukraine via trucks and cars. He adds, there are 2 reasons why I did this. Firstly, of course, I'm an embryologist and all of the embryos are created by me. Any mother or father will not leave their kids easy, and it's the same for me. The second reason, the liquid nitrogen explosion is quite dangerous in case of fire or some other chemicals are mixed up. It's best to move them safely. And obviously, you can hear the emotion in my voice. And to me, I think it's important to understand that, especially for those that have had, issues with fertility, as many increasingly more people are, this is their route to bring children into this world, and war is interrupting that. And there's another story that's directly related to this, which I want to bring up, which is from Sky News, and this is an insane thing that I realize there's a point to this that we'll talk about at the end of this, but it's from Sky News, and it's about British couples that fly to Ukraine for IVF, and they're being faced with being separated from their children. And I'm going to read here. It says, British couples undergoing fertility treatment in Ukraine face being separated from their children by an impending war, but many have said they are not deterred by traveling warnings. Hundreds of people from the UK and Ireland visit Ukraine every year to undergo fertility treatment and use Ukrainian surrogates. I'm just going to cut to the chase. I mean, they do this because it's cheaper in Ukraine. They do this because it's cheaper in Ukraine than they do it. This should be covered under every universal health plan. Obviously, the NHS has been, just continuing to be gutted and decimated by conservative governments in the UK, but this should be anyway. But with the threat of an impending invasion from Russia, the UK government is advising against all travel to the region. This has left families torn about whether or not to continue treatment, and concerned about what could happen to any babies born during that conflict. Rend Platings from Cambridge has suffered 5 miscarriages and told Sky News that she believes a fertility clinic in Ukraine is her only hope of having another baby. As well as having IVF at a private clinic in London, she has had 4 procedures at the Biotexcom fertility clinic in Kiev. She intends to return to the country in March for another round. Ms. Platings has previously traveled to the country with her husband Michael and their 7-year-old daughter Samantha, who was conceived traditionally. She has spent thousands of pounds on treatment in Ukraine, and she is not deterred by any travel warnings. It wouldn't stop me from going just because the advice is not to go. The whole thing means too much to me. I would take the risk to go on my own just because I have already risked so much in this painful journey. She said this clinic was the best chance for their family, as they already now have their medical background. It would be a dream come true, and I really hope that the politicians and whoever is making this situation so difficult can just calm down and make things peaceful. Everyone just wants peace. We want peace because peace enables us to get on with our lives. Speaking from Kiev, support manager Konstantin Nekrosenko from Biotexcom said the fertility clinic has built an emergency bomb shelter to protect any babies born if a war was to break out. During the pandemic, the clinic had 50 newborns being kept in the Hotel Venice facility while their parents could not reach them as a result of travel restrictions. Can you fucking imagine? So here's the problem, and I'm going to read this a little bit later, but there are surrogates currently carrying the children of parents in the UK. You can't slow down a pregnancy, right? It happens on its own time. It can't take a break for war. And, the trauma that is going to happen to these children and the stress that the surrogates are going under as they are, in progressing in their pregnancies have effect on these kids that did not consent to war. And, their parents who have definitely suffered a lot as a result of their fertility struggles are going through unimaginable pain in their journey to try to become parents. And it's just incredible to me that this is one of the human costs of war. Kids and children babies are our greatest resource. And they're being born into a world that's completely unimaginable to the ones that we grew up in. Even just with climate change and everything. And they are the ones that are going to have to carry the torch. And obviously the hope is for us, the left, the people that have a very clear understanding of the ills that are creating pain and strife in this world are the ones that need to create a better life for the kids than the one that we certainly have. That's the hope. And, the fact that there are children being born right now into these conflict zones, and this is far from isolated. The entirety, I just think about Yemen. I think about Iraq. I think about Afghanistan. I think about Palestine. All these conflict zones where these large imperial powers are having a freaking fit, and have to. Who the fuck even knows what pathology is creating this drive for war? What the fuck ever? I don't give a shit. I want it to stop. I have been committed to anti-war causes since my youth. I anticipate that many of those that are listening have also felt the same way. I'm sure that there's some of us that have been touched by war themselves, which I don't want to get into, but personally. But this is what happens, and it's some real sick shit. And again, like I said with Billy Bragg, those freedom is merely privilege extended unless enjoyed by one and all, and especially for those that did not consent to be born into a world that is able to show as much sickness as what we're seeing right now in Ukraine. So, as is typical on some Dwight Spites episode, I've probably, completely depressed you. I apologize. Again, the purpose of, this is a bit of catharsis, I suppose. And, I think for us to kind of come together and understand the specific, pathology of what we're experiencing in our worlds helps us understand it and shape it in our minds. Because unless we do this and kind of come to an understanding together as a community. And Jesus Christ, I can't explain enough how important this community is to me. And I thank everybody, including my incredible co-hosts, for coming together and being part of this and sharing this together. Unless we do this, we'll fucking go crazy. You can't. You can't. You can't do it alone. And you have to make sense of it in your head. And I think it's an extremely useful tool for us is our communication, our shared humor and stuff to try to stay positive in some of the certainly the most in. Sometimes I think about this a lot, and I know this shows like also the privilege of the time that I was born in, and my particular points of privilege for who I am growing up in the United States as a white man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I sometimes I think now where I just feel like so brutalized, and some days at the end of the day it's just like it's like 7:30, and I'm just like, do I have 3 more hours of this day? Like, can we just speed this up? Like, I'm done. I'm so fucking, spent and all this shit. I just think like, I certainly appreciate history. I just didn't expect to be living through it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, fuck, we're here. This is happening. This is happening in front of us. There's nothing else we could do except deal with it. And so me and my convictions, and I'm sure you and your convictions are shared in the sense that I'll be fucking damned if I didn't do my part to leave this world better than when I found it. So anyway, listen, guys, thank you so much for joining on this, really intense episode of Dwight's Bites. I hope you'll, excuse the emotion in my voice from before. I just, well, you get it. I think I explained myself enough. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for listening, and, we'll see you later. Stay cool.
Now, out of the night, soft as the dawn, into the light, this child, innocent child, soft as a fawn, this child is born, one small heart, one pair of eyes, one work of art. Here in my arms, here he lies, trusting and warm. Blessed this morn, a child is born.